My husband faked terminal cancer, begging for a divorce so I wouldn't watch him die. I signed away our life, my hand shaking with grief, believing his noble lie. He thought it was his perfect escape. He had no idea. He'd just awoken a sleeping dragon. Standing on that stage, looking out at my ex-husband's terrified face as his carefully constructed world burned to the ground on the giant screen behind me, I could only think of one thing. This is for you, Grandpa. The flashbulbs from the press photographers popped like miniature supernovas, and for a second, the blinding white light threw me back in time. Back 6 months, to a different kind of white room. A room that didn't smell of champagne and victory, but of lemon polish and the soul-crushing stench of deceit. My life, as I knew it, had ended in our sun-drenched living room in Lincoln Park, Chicago. The cream-colored sofa felt like a block of ice beneath me. On the polished mahogany coffee table, nestled between a copy of Architectural Digest and a vase of white lilies, was a medical file. It wasn't thick, but it felt heavier than the entire city. Across from me sat Victor. My Victor. The man I had loved since we were college sweethearts. The man I'd helped build a business with from nothing, my partner for 8 years. He looked thinner, yes, and there were expertly applied shadows under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, and I noticed a slight, almost imperceptible tremor. It was a masterful performance. "Ilara," he began, his voice a carefully crafted rasp. "There's no easy way to say this." He pushed the file across the table. I opened it with numb fingers. The letterhead was from a prestigious neurological institute. The words swam before my eyes, cold and clinical. Cortical basal degenerative syndrome. A rare, aggressive, and incurable neurological disorder. The prognosis was typed at the bottom. A clinical death sentence. 6 to 9 months. My world tilted on its axis. A roaring sound filled my ears, drowning out the distant city traffic. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, Vic, we'll fight this. We'll find other doctors. We'll go anywhere. In sickness and in health, remember?" He gave me a sad, noble smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's why I have to do this, Ellie. I won't let you watch me waste away. I won't let your last memories of me be of a man who can't feed himself." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate, heartbreaking whisper. "I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for you. I want you to be free. I've already spoken to the lawyers." He explained it all with such selfless, tragic logic. A quick, clean divorce. He didn't want to burden me with the crippling medical debt. He would sign over his shares in our company to me, shares I knew were already leveraged to the hilt for a project he'd insisted on. He would leave me the house, a house that now felt like a mausoleum. He was giving me a beautiful, hollowed-out cage, decorated with the illusion of his love and sacrifice. And I, blinded by love and grief, believed every word. I cried, I begged, but he was resolute in his final act of love. The next day I sat in a sterile law office and signed away my future, agreeing to his terms, wanting only to ease the pain of the man I loved. I signed everything, my hand shaking so badly the pen scratched the paper. I was giving him the peaceful end he wanted, even if it shattered me into a million pieces. It's a terrifying feeling, isn't it? When the person you'd take a bullet for is the one holding the gun. Drop a comment below if you've ever had a gut feeling that something was deeply wrong, even when everything on the surface looked right. I remember walking out of that office into the crisp Chicago air, feeling like a ghost. I had no idea that my life hadn't just ended. It had been a lie. And the truth, when it came, wouldn't set me free. It would arm me for war. For a week, I drifted through our cavernous Lincoln Park house like a ghost. Victor had already left for a specialized treatment facility in Switzerland, a place so exclusive and private that he claimed they didn't allow calls for the first month. The silence he left behind was a physical presence. Every room held a memory of him, now tainted with the specter of his impending death. I would find myself standing in his closet, my fingers tracing the lapel of his favorite suit, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne, and feeling a wave of grief so profound it would buckle my knees. I was mourning a man who was still alive, a pain so uniquely cruel it felt like I was being hollowed out from the inside. My phone buzzed constantly with pitying texts from friends, but one afternoon, an unknown number with a downtown Chicago area code flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Am I speaking with Miss Alara Thorne?" a man's voice asked. It was calm, deep, and carried an air of authority that cut through my fog of sorrow. "This is she," I answered, my voice hoarse from not using it. "Miss Thorne, my name is Leo Vance. I am a senior partner at Vance, Barrow and Associates. I was the personal attorney for your late grandfather, Mr. Augustus Thorne. My grandfather, Gus, he'd passed away 2 years prior. He was a tough, brilliant man who had built a construction empire from the ground up, and he had never been Victor's biggest fan. He was always polite, but I would catch him watching Victor with a quiet, analytical gaze I could never decipher. "Mr. Vance," I said, confused, "is there a problem with the estate?" "Not a problem, Miss Thorne. Rather, a matter of execution," he said, his tone precise. "A particular clause in your grandfather's primary trust has been triggered. It is a time-sensitive matter. Would it be possible for you to come to my office tomorrow at 10? I agreed, more out of a sense of duty than curiosity. The next morning, I found myself in a different world. His office wasn't the flashy, glass and chrome aesthetic Victor and I favored. It was old Chicago money. Walls paneled in dark, rich walnut, shelves lined with leather-bound legal books that smelled of history, and a vast window offering a panoramic view of the city and Lake Michigan. Leo Vance was a man in his mid-30s, sharp and impeccably dressed, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the fragile facade I had built around myself. After a brief, polite exchange, he slid a thick vellum folder across his desk. "This," he said, "is the Augustus Thorne Generational Trust." He opened it to a specific page, marked with a tab. "Your grandfather was a discerning man," Leo said carefully. "He established this trust fund years ago with a very specific, and I must say, highly unusual activation clause." He let the words hang in the air for a moment. The trust, currently valued at $85 million, was structured to transfer to you, its sole beneficiary, under one condition. He looked me directly in the eyes. The full principal and all assets were to be released to you immediately upon the legal and official dissolution of your marriage to Mr. Victor Sterling. I stared at him. The number $85 million was so astronomical it sounded like a joke, but the look on his face was anything but. The room began to spin, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was from the violent, sickening click of puzzle pieces slamming into place. My grandfather's quiet disapproval, his watchful eyes, a trust that only activated if I was free of Victor. And suddenly, the image of my brave, selfless, dying husband shattered. In its place was a cold, calculating monster. The fake illness, the rushed divorce, the timing. It wasn't a tragedy, it was a heist. He hadn't been protecting me from his death. He had been orchestrating my dispossession. My grandfather had seen it. He had seen the predator I had mistaken for a soulmate, and from beyond the grave, he had built me a lifeboat. The tears that welled in my eyes weren't for the husband I was losing, but for the fool I had been. The sorrow in my chest wasn't grief anymore. It was rage, cold and pure, solidifying into something hard and sharp. It's amazing how one piece of information can change your entire reality, isn't it? Suddenly the past looks completely different. If you've ever had a light bulb moment that rewrote your own history, I'd be fascinated to hear about it in the comments. I stood up and walked to the vast office window, looking down at the bustling city below. I was no longer a victim. I was the sole beneficiary of the Thorne legacy. And my inheritance wasn't just $85 million. It was a weapon. Victor thought he had left me in ruins. He had no idea he had just led me to my arsenal. I walked out of Leo Vance's office and into the roaring heart of downtown Chicago, a different woman. The grief that had cloaked me for weeks had burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard clarity of purpose. My grandfather hadn't just left me money, he had left me a mission. Victor thought he had played me, but the game wasn't over. A new round had just begun, and this time I knew the rules. My first move wasn't an attack, but a relocation. I couldn't stay in the Lincoln Park house, a museum of our shared lies. I needed a fortress. I called Leo. "I need to know where he is," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Not the fake clinic in Switzerland, the real place." Within an hour, I had an answer. Leo's firm, as part of their due diligence in managing the trust, had been discreetly monitoring Victor's finances for years. They had flagged a recent seven-figure all-cash purchase for a condominium. It wasn't in Victor's name, of course. It was in the name of a Miss Stella Price. The address was on the 80th floor of the John Hancock Center, a spectacular apartment with breathtaking views. He had bought his mistress a castle in the sky with my money. That afternoon, I walked into the most exclusive real estate brokerage in the Gold Coast. The agent saw my simple black dress and probably assumed I was lost. "Can I help you?" he asked, a hint of condescension in his voice. "Yes," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "I'm interested in the John Hancock Center. Do you have anything available above the 80th floor?" He blinked. "Ma'am, the only unit available at that height is the penthouse. It's a significant investment." I'm aware," I said, sliding one of the new unlimited credit cards Leo had arranged for me across the desk. "I'll be making a cash offer. I want to close by the end of the week." The agent's demeanor changed so fast it was almost comical. Within 3 days, I was the owner of the most coveted piece of real estate in Chicago. The penthouse wasn't just an apartment, it was a statement. It occupied the entire top floor, with 360-degree views that stretched from the shores of Lake Michigan to the sprawling suburbs. And, most importantly, my floor-to-ceiling windows looked directly down upon the balcony of Victor and Stella's little love nest. My revenge began not with a confrontation, but with a whisper. I knew Stella. I had seen her at company parties. She was young, beautiful, and deeply insecure, masking it with a desperate obsession for status. Her entire identity was built on being seen, on being envied. So, I decided to give her something to envy. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I didn't arrange an accidental run-in at the lobby. I simply began to live my life, loudly and beautifully, on social media. My Instagram, once a quiet collection of travel photos and pictures of my dog, was reborn. It started with a simple photo, a glass of vintage Cabernet held up against the skyline from my new balcony at sunset. The caption was innocent. New beginnings. But in the corner of the photo, artfully blurred but still recognizable, was their balcony, 10 floors below. Then came another post, a casual shot of a massive abstract painting being installed in my living room by white-gloved professionals. "Finally found the perfect piece for this wall," I wrote. I knew Stella, who thought designer handbags were the pinnacle of culture, would see it and feel a sting of inadequacy. I posted photos from front-row seats at the Chicago Symphony, from private gallery openings, from charity galas where I was now a coveted guest. Every post was a quiet, elegant testament to a world of true wealth and influence, a world Victor's stolen money could get Stella close to, but never truly inside. I imagined her, scrolling through her phone, her perfectly manicured nails tapping with agitation. Her own posts, once full of smug selfies with Victor, became more frantic. A new Cartier bracelet, a weekend trip to Miami. It was all so loud, so desperate. Her flashiness looked cheap next to my quiet power. I was making her beautiful new life feel like a consolation prize. It's a different kind of warfare, isn't it? The kind fought with whispers and pictures instead of shouts and fists. Have you ever realized that sometimes the most powerful move you can make is to simply live an amazing life? Let me know your thoughts on that. One evening, I stood on my balcony, the cool Chicago wind whipping through my hair. The lights of the apartment on the 80th floor glowed warmly. I could picture them in there, having dinner, trying to enjoy the life they had stolen. But they would know I was up here, a constant, silent presence in the sky above them. My war wouldn't be won with a single, fiery explosion. It would be a slow siege, dismantling his empire and his new life, one brick at a time. And I was just laying the first stone. Living above my enemies was satisfying, but it was a quiet, personal victory. My war required more than just psychological games. It needed a public declaration. Attacking Victor directly was still too soon. His web of lies was intricate, and I needed to gather more intelligence. But to do that, I needed to change the way Chicago saw me. I had to erase the image of the pitiful, abandoned wife and replace it with someone else entirely. Someone formidable. To do that, I needed a bigger stage and a deserving first victim. His name was Felix Grant. Before I left my career to help Victor build our company, I was a rising star at one of Chicago's top architecture firms. Felix was my direct superior, a man whose mediocrity was matched only by his arrogance. He was a master of the corporate world, not because of his talent, but because he knew how to steal it from others. He'd called my designs a little too feminine in meetings, only to present my core concepts as his own a week later. He was the kind of man who would compliment your work in private and then subtly belittle you in front of a client. He represented every quiet humiliation, every moment I had been underestimated. He was the perfect target. I knew the annual Chicago Architecture Guild Awards Gala was coming up. It was the industry's most prestigious event, a night of backpatting and champagne-fueled egos. Through the new network of contacts my Thorn inheritance had unlocked, I learned that Felix's firm was the frontrunner for the coveted Design of the Year award. And the project they were nominated for? The Aria Tower. A sleek, innovative skyscraper whose foundational design concept had come from a series of late-night sketches in my own notebook, just before I left the firm. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. The stage was set. My plan required a position of power. I couldn't just be a guest in the audience. So, the Thorn Foundation made a phone call. A week before the event, I became the gala's official presenting sponsor. My donation was so significant, so far beyond their usual sponsorships, that they practically rolled out a red carpet to their offices. My new status guaranteed me two things: a seat at the head table, right next to the Guild's president, and the honor of presenting the final award of the Night Design of the Year. The night of the gala, held at the stunning Art Institute of Chicago, I walked in feeling a current of electricity in the air. The room was buzzing. People knew me as Victor's ex-wife, the woman at the center of the city's most tragic new gossip. But they didn't know me as the benefactor whose name was now emblazoned on all the banners. I saw the moment Felix noticed me. He was holding court by the bar, laughing loudly. His eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of confusion, quickly replaced by a smug, dismissive smirk. He saw his old subordinate, not a threat. It was the last mistake he would ever make in this industry. The evening wore on, and finally the moment came. The Guild president stepped to the podium. And now, for our final award, Design of the Year, presented by the generous Thorn Foundation. Please welcome to the stage Miss Alara Thorn. I walked up to the podium, the applause polite but laced with curiosity. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. I saw Felix at his table, beaming, ready for his victory lap. I smiled warmly into the microphone. Good evening. It's an honor to be here. Good design is about vision, passion, and above all, integrity. I opened the envelope. The award for Design of the Year goes to Grant Architects for the Aria Tower. The room erupted in applause. Felix, puffed up with pride, swaggered onto the stage. He shook my hand, his palm sweaty, and his smile triumphant. I handed him the heavy crystal trophy. As he turned to the microphone, I gently touched his arm. Just one more thing, Felix, if I may, I said sweetly. I turned back to the audience. The vision for the Aria Tower is truly remarkable. I should know. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Because I drafted the original schematics myself in the fall of 2023, before I left the firm. A collective gasp went through the hall. Felix froze, his face turning from celebratory red to a ghastly pale white. Before he could say a word, I gave a signal to the tech booth. A massive image filled the screen behind us. My original, time-stamped digital blueprint files, complete with my signature block. The proof, subpoenaed by Leo's team from the firm's servers just days before, was undeniable. I leaned into the microphone, my voice dropping but carrying through the dead silent room. The Thorn Foundation believes integrity is everything. We will be withdrawing our sponsorship, effective immediately, unless the Guild rescinds this award and launches a full ethics investigation into the practices of its recipient. It feels good to finally see the truth come to light, doesn't it? Tell me in the comments about a time you saw someone get the credit they truly deserved, or maybe when they finally got called out for taking what wasn't theirs. I didn't wait for a response. I placed the microphone back on its stand, gave a slight nod to the horrified Guild president, and walked off the stage, leaving Felix standing alone in the spotlight, exposed and humiliated. The whispers behind me turned into a roar. I didn't look back. The message had been sent. This wasn't just for Felix. This was a warning shot. And I knew, somewhere in this city, Victor would hear the boom. The fallout from the Architecture Guild Gala was exactly what I'd hoped for. The story was everywhere. Chicago's business circles were buzzing, not with pity for the poor, abandoned Alara Thorn, but with a wary respect for the new president of the Thorn Foundation. I had drawn a line in the sand. But the beautiful thing about public spectacles is that they make your enemy look in the wrong direction. While Victor and the city were reeling from my public takedown of Felix, they assumed my revenge was about settling old scores, about personal slights. They saw me as emotional. They never imagined my real strategy was cold, silent, and aimed directly at the financial empire he was building on the ashes of our life together. Leo's team had confirmed that Victor had funneled millions from our shared company, Thorn and Sterling Development, into a series of anonymous shell corporations. The paper trail was a masterpiece of deception, winding through offshore accounts from the Cayman Islands to Liechtenstein. We had the documents, but they were circumstantial. We could prove the money was gone, but we couldn't definitively prove he was the one who moved it with criminal intent. To a jury, it could look like a series of aggressive but legitimate business write-offs. I didn't need a paper trail, I needed a confession, and I knew Victor would never give one to me. So, I decided he would give it to someone else. I used the Thorn Foundation's considerable resources to hire a corporate intelligence firm. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill private investigator. These were ex-intelligence agents, forensic accountants, and psychological profilers, the kind of people who operate in the deep, gray shadows of the corporate world. I gave them a simple directive: build a trap so perfect, so tailored to Victor's greed and ego, that he wouldn't just walk into it, he would sprint. The plan was codenamed Ares. The firm created a fictitious boutique investment fund, Ares Global Ventures, complete with a stunning website, fabricated press releases, and a legendary and completely fake founder. Ares specialized in high-risk, high-return offshore real estate, with a quiet reputation for helping its exclusive clientele move capital with maximum discretion and minimal regulatory friction. It was bait, soaked in the irresistible scent of laundered money. The delivery system was a man named Alistair, a British operative with a flawless Savile Row suit and the easy charm of old money. He got a warm introduction to Victor through a mutual acquaintance, a stockbroker with a gambling problem that my new firm just happened to have discovered. The meeting was set for a private, soundproof room at Gibson's, a classic Chicago steakhouse where deals are sealed over whiskey and 24-ounce porterhouses. I watched from a secure live feed in my penthouse, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. The entire room was wired. Alistair was brilliant. He didn't sell, he invited. He spoke of the unfortunate constraints of the American banking system. He painted a picture of a world where men of vision like Victor could operate freely. He dangled the prospect of a 50% return on a new development in Panama. Victor, preening under the attention, took the bait. "I'm no stranger to creative accounting," Victor bragged after his second glass of Macallan 25, the hidden cameras capturing the arrogant glint in his eye. "Moving capital where it needs to go is something of an art form." "I'm sure it is," Alistair said smoothly. "Our most successful clients are the ones who know how to liquidate assets from, let's say, complicated partnerships." Victor leaned in, his voice dropping conspiratorially. Complicated is an understatement. My last major venture involved disentangling myself from a partner who was emotionally compromised. I had to set up a network of LLCs to transfer the core assets before the official dissolution. She never saw a thing. Thought it was all just business debt. He laughed. A short, ugly sound. She was signing her own bankruptcy papers and thought she was helping me. My hands clenched into fists. He was talking about me. He was boasting about his betrayal, using it as a resume to impress a man who wasn't real. He went on, sketching the basic framework of his embezzlement scheme on a napkin, his ego overriding every shred of caution. It's always the ego that gets them in the end, isn't it? That belief that you're too smart to get caught. What do you guys think is the biggest weakness that leads to a person's downfall? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Back in my penthouse, I watched the operative save the encrypted video file. It wasn't a moment of joy, it was grim. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. I now had Victor, in his own words, admitting to fraud. The paper trail now had a narrator. The quiet siege of his psyche was over. Now, I had the ammunition for a full-scale assault. The encrypted video of Victor's confession was my ace in the hole, a trump card I kept pressed close to my chest. It would have been easy to leak it to the press or hand it to the authorities. I could have sent him to prison, and for a few days, I savored that thought. But my grandfather didn't build an empire just for me to get simple, fleeting revenge. Sending Victor to jail felt like an ending to his story. I was interested in the beginning of mine. To truly honor the Thorn name, I couldn't just expose a thief. I had to rebuild a legacy. I had to beat him in the one arena he believed he owned, the world of Chicago construction. After the divorce, Victor had been appointed executive vice president at the Price Group, the construction dynasty owned by his new fiancé's father, a ruthless old shark named Conrad Price. It was a strategic merger of ambition and power, funded, I knew, by the 8-figure seed money Victor had stolen from me. They were the new power couple in the city's development scene, and they had their sights set on the biggest prize in a decade, the Chicago Riverwalk redevelopment project. It wasn't just another construction bid. It was a legacy project, a multi-billion-dollar contract to transform the city's waterfront into a stunning public space. Winning it meant more than just profit. It meant political influence, public adoration, and a permanent mark on the city's skyline. The Price Group, with their connections and aggressive tactics, were the undisputed frontrunners. It was their coronation, and I decided to crash the party. A foundation, even one with $85 million, can't bid on a project of that scale. I needed an army. I needed a company. Leo's team identified the perfect target, East Side Builders, a 70-year-old firm with a stellar reputation for quality, but which had fallen on hard times after its founder passed away. They were drowning in debt and on the verge of being acquired for pennies on the dollar by a larger competitor. I moved swiftly. I didn't just invest, I took over. Over the course of one brutal week, the Thorn Foundation acquired all of Eastside's outstanding debt, injected a massive amount of capital for new equipment and talent, and placed a new, fiercely loyal board of directors at its helm. 2 weeks later, at a press conference that sent shockwaves through the industry, we unveiled our new identity. Eastside Builders was no more. In its place stood Thorn Construction. My name, my grandfather's name, was back in the game. The battle for the Riverwalk project was a war fought in boardrooms. Conrad Price and Victor were arrogant. They saw me as a dilettante, a rich girl playing with her inheritance. They submitted a bid that was aggressive and cheap, cutting corners on materials and labor, confident that their backroom political deals would seal their victory. Our bid was different. It was a masterpiece of strategy. We didn't just want to be cheaper, we wanted to be undeniably better. We proposed using next-generation sustainable materials, partnering with local unions to guarantee high-paying jobs, and incorporating more public green space than the city had even asked for. Our financial statements were transparent and backed by the full, liquid assets of the Thorn Foundation. We weren't just selling a construction plan, we were selling a vision of integrity. The day the city council announced the winning bid, the chamber was packed. I sat in the front row with Leo. Across the aisle, Victor and Conrad Price were laughing, already accepting congratulations from their allies. When the council chairman stepped to the microphone and announced, "After careful review, the committee has awarded the contract to the bid that represents the future of our city, Thorn Construction," the silence was deafening. I watched the color drain from Conrad Price's face. I saw Victor stare at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of pure hatred and disbelief. We hadn't just beaten them, we had humiliated them. We had proven that their empire of shortcuts and corruption was no match for a legacy of quality and vision. They had the stolen cash, but I had the better plan. There's a saying, the best revenge is massive success. I was starting to see the truth in that. What do you think is more powerful, the satisfaction of destroying an enemy, or the pride in building something they could never dream of? I'm curious to see what you all think in the comments. As we walked out, mobbed by reporters, I knew this victory was a mortal blow. The Price Group had leveraged everything on this contract. Their stock would plummet, their creditors would come calling. I hadn't just won a project, I had lit a fire at the base of their ivory tower, and I knew the pressure would make the rats inside desperate. One of them, I suspected, would soon be looking for a way out. Winning the Riverwalk contract wasn't just a victory, it was an earthquake. The Price Group stock nosedived overnight. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story, headlined, "Thorn's Triumph. A new empire rises as an old one falters." Conrad Price, once the untouchable titan of Chicago real estate, was suddenly facing a barrage of questions from his investors and creditors. The financial pressure I had applied was working even better than I'd imagined. A structure built on stolen money is a house of cards, and I had just pulled out the foundation. I knew this kind of pressure would test the already fragile alliance between Victor and his new family. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and from the reports I was getting from my intelligence team, Victor was becoming increasingly erratic. He was seen arguing with Conrad Price in public. His bar tabs were astronomical. He was unraveling, and I knew exactly who would be bearing the brunt of his rage. The call came 2 weeks after the bid announcement, late on a Tuesday night. It was from a blocked number. "Is this Alara?" The voice was a hoarse whisper, stripped of its usual condescending purr. It was Stella. "You have a new number," I said, my voice flat and cold. "He smashed my other phone," she whispered, and I could hear a tremor of fear in her voice. "Listen, I don't have much time. I have something for you, something you'll want. It's everything." "I know." "Why would you help me, Stella?" I asked, skeptical. "Because I chose the wrong side," she said, her voice cracking. "And I need a way out. Meet me tomorrow. Noon. The lounge at the Peninsula. Come alone." She hung up before I could reply. I chose a table in the far corner of the hotel lounge, a quiet, opulent space where the city's elite made discreet deals. It gave me a clear view of the entrance. She arrived 5 minutes late, a bundle of nervous energy wrapped in a Chanel coat that seemed too big for her now. She was thinner, her face pale beneath a layer of expertly applied makeup. She slid into the seat opposite me, pulling her sunglasses off. That's when I saw it. A faint, yellowish bruise high on her cheekbone, a ghost of a fingerprint that her foundation couldn't quite conceal. She followed my gaze and flinched, looking down at her hands. "He's not the man I thought he was," she said, her voice barely audible. "Since the Riverwalk deal fell through, he's a monster. He blames me. He blames my father. He says we're weak. The life he promised, it was all a lie." I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy. She was a co-conspirator who was only jumping ship now that it was sinking. "You said you had something for me," I stated, keeping my tone strictly business. Her hands trembled as she reached into her $1,000 handbag and pulled out a small, black USB flash drive. It looked so ordinary. She pushed it across the marble tabletop. "This is his personal drive," she said. "He's arrogant. He keeps everything. The real ledgers for the Price Group, the ones that show the money laundering. The contracts for the shell companies he used to gut your old business, scans of his secret accounting books. It's all on here." I looked from the drive to her face. "What do you want?" "A way out," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. $2 million wired to an overseas account and a one-way first-class ticket to Lisbon. I want to disappear. It was a steep price, but the contents of that drive were priceless. "After my people verify what's on this drive, you'll get what you want," I agreed, picking it up. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. "It's a tough question, but what would you do in her shoes? When you realize you've made a terrible mistake and the person you allied with is a monster, is betrayal justified for survival?" There are no easy answers, so I'm really interested to see your perspectives on this one. I stood up to leave, the transaction complete. "Wait," Stella said, her eyes wide with a strange mix of fear and urgency. "There's one more thing. A folder on the drive. It's encrypted with a password I couldn't crack. But the file name is Augustus." I froze, my hand on my purse. Augustus, my grandfather's name. A cold dread, far deeper and more chilling than anything I had felt before, washed over me. This was no longer just about Victor's crimes. This was about my family. The USB drive in my hand suddenly felt less like a weapon and more like a key to a tomb, and I was terrified of what I might find inside. I paid Stella her blood money, wiring the $2 million to her offshore account and booking her a one-way ticket to Lisbon. I didn't care if she found her new life or not. I just needed her gone, a loose end tied up and discarded. The main contents of the USB drive were a prosecutor's dream, a meticulously detailed map of Victor's and the Price Group's financial crimes. Leo was ecstatic. We had enough to put Victor away for a decade. But my mind wasn't on the slam-dunk evidence of money laundering or fraud. It was fixated on that single encrypted folder, Augustus. It was locked down tight. My own attempts to guess the password, my grandfather's birthday, his old army unit, his favorite dog's name all failed. This was a secret he didn't want easily found. I contacted the same cybersecurity firm from the Ares operation. I don't care what it costs, I told their lead analyst over a secure line. Crack it. For 48 agonizing hours, I barely slept. I paced the floor of my penthouse, the city lights a blur below me, feeling like an archaeologist about to open a long-lost tomb. The rest of the USB drive was about Victor's crimes, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this folder was about his sins. Finally, an email arrived. One word in the subject line, done. The password, they explained, wasn't a word, but a date. The day my grandfather's original construction company officially declared bankruptcy, 35 years ago. With trembling hands, I entered the date. The folder opened. It wasn't just a few documents. It was a digital archive of a forgotten history. Scanned pages of a leather-bound journal, faded black and white photographs, and old, notarized legal papers. I started to read, and as I did, the story of my life, the real story, began to unravel. The photos showed two young men, barely out of their teens, standing proudly in front of a rusty pickup truck. One was my grandfather, Augustus Thorne, tall and smiling. The other was a man I recognized from newspaper clippings, a young Conrad Price. They weren't rivals, they were brothers in arms, having served in the same platoon in Vietnam. They had returned to Chicago in the late 72nd, and, with a small loan and a mountain of ambition, started a construction company together. Thorne and Price. My grandfather's journal entries from that time were filled with hope. He wasn't just a builder, he was an innovator. He wrote for pages and pages about a secret project, a formula he was developing in his workshop. He called it Thorncrete. It was a revolutionary concrete, composite lightweight, stronger than steel, and made from recycled materials. It was a green technology, 30 years ahead of its time. It was his life's work, his legacy. Then, the journal entries turned dark. Conrad had become distant, obsessed with money and shortcuts. And then came the ultimate betrayal. The legal documents told the rest of the story. Conrad Price had secretly filed the patent for Thorncrete under his name alone. He then systematically siphoned money and clients from their shared company into a new entity he had created on the side, the Price Group. He left my grandfather with all the debt and a company that was nothing but a hollow shell. My grandfather was ruined. He lost his business, his best friend, and his invention, all in one fell swoop. My blood ran cold. The entire Price Group, the multi-billion-dollar empire that Victor had married into, was built on a lie. It was built on the stolen dream of Augustus Thorne. And suddenly, Victor's actions weren't just the crimes of a greedy, cheating husband. They were the second act of a generational conspiracy. He hadn't just married me for my money. He had targeted me to finish the job his father-in-law had started, to erase the last remnant of the Thorne name from the Chicago business world. My pain, my heartbreak, it was all just collateral damage in a war that had started before I was even born. Have you ever discovered a piece of your family's history that changed the way you see everything? It's like finding a hidden chapter in your own story. I'd love to hear if any of you have had an experience like that, uncovering a secret that explains so much about the present. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting the furious tears streaming down my face. The rage was white-hot now, but it was different. It wasn't just personal anymore. This wasn't about a broken heart. It was about a broken legacy. I picked up my phone and called Leo. "Forget the embezzlement charges for a minute, Leo," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "We have a new priority. It's not about sending Victor to jail anymore. It's about getting my grandfather's name back on that patent. We're not just exposing a criminal, we're taking back an empire." Discovering my grandfather's story changed the entire chemical composition of my rage. The desire for personal revenge, as hot and intoxicating as it had been, now felt small, almost petty. This was a 35-year-old wound, a generational injustice that had shaped the fortunes of two families. Conrad Price hadn't just stolen a patent, he had stolen a future. He had stolen the Thorne legacy. And Victor was just the final, arrogant chapter in a long, sordid story of theft. My mission was no longer just to tear them down. It was to rebuild what they had broken. To do that, I needed to control the narrative completely. A lawsuit over the patent would be a slow, ugly battle fought in the shadows of the legal system. It would take years, and the truth could be buried under an avalanche of expensive lawyers. I needed something faster, more definitive. I needed to try them in the court of public opinion, where the verdict would be swift and absolute. I needed a stage, a spotlight, and an audience they couldn't run from. So, I decided to throw a party. It wouldn't be just any party. It would be the charity event of the year. The inaugural Augustus Thorne Legacy Gala, hosted by the Thorne Foundation. The stated purpose was to launch a new grant program to support young, independent innovators and entrepreneurs, a beautiful, poignant tribute to my grandfather's stolen dream. The venue was the Grand Ballroom at the Palmer House Hilton, a place steeped in Chicago history. The guest list was a curated collection of the city's most powerful figures: politicians, business magnates, society mavens, and of course, the press. Victor and Conrad Price would have no choice but to attend. Their company's reputation was already in tatters after losing the Riverwalk contract. To snub a high-profile charity event, especially one honoring a man their family had once partnered with, would be a PR disaster. They would have to walk into my arena, smiling for the cameras, completely unaware that they were the evening's main event. For the next month, my team and I worked with the precision of a military unit planning an invasion. Every detail was meticulously crafted. From the floral arrangements to the musical selection, everything was designed to create an atmosphere of elegance and unimpeachable integrity. But my real work was happening in a secure editing suite in the Thorne Construction Building. With a small, trusted team, I began to weave together the story of their downfall. It was a video, a 10-minute documentary that would be the centerpiece of the evening. It was my kill shot. It began with a juxtaposition. Photos of Victor looking healthy and radiant with Stella on a yacht in the Caribbean, dated the same week he was supposedly in a Swiss clinic for his terminal illness. Then, it cut to the hidden camera footage from the Aries sting. The audience would see Victor, in his own words, bragging about his financial crimes, his voice dripping with arrogance as he described how he deceived his emotionally compromised wife. The next segment was built from the contents of Stella's USB drive. Complex financial charts were simplified into damning, easy-to-understand graphics, showing the flow of millions of dollars from our company into his offshore accounts. The betrayal was laid bare, not as a messy divorce, but as a calculated criminal conspiracy. But the final act was the most powerful. I had hired a historian to find old newsreels and photographs of Thorne and Price construction in its heyday. The screen would fill with black and white images of my grandfather and Conrad Price as young men, full of hope. Then, I would overlay scanned pages from my grandfather's journal, his own handwriting telling the story of his dream, his innovation, and his ultimate betrayal. The final image would be the patent for Thorne Crete, with Conrad Price's name on it, next to the date he filed it, the day after my grandfather had enthusiastically shown him the final, perfected formula. The night of the gala, the ballroom was breathtaking. It glittered with chandeliers and the clinking of champagne glasses. I moved through the crowd, accepting compliments on the event, my heart a steady, cold metronome. Then I saw them arrive. Conrad Price, looking aged and weary, and Victor, trying to project an air of confidence that didn't reach his haunted eyes. He saw me from across the room and gave me a tight, hateful smirk. He still thought he was in a game with his ex-wife. He had no idea he was at his own execution. There's something so powerful about setting a trap and watching your target walk right into it. It's the ultimate game of chess. Have you ever had to plan something meticulously, waiting for the perfect moment to make your move? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear it. Later in the evening, after the dinner plates were cleared, I walked onto the stage. A single spotlight hit me. The room fell silent. I looked out at the sea of faces, my gaze finally landing on Victor. I gave him a small, cryptic smile. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and steady. "Tonight we are here to celebrate legacy. But sometimes, before we can build a new one, we must first uncover the truth about the old one." I gave a signal to the tech booth. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and the giant screen behind me flickered to life. The show was about to begin. The moment the video ended, plunging the screen into darkness, a profound silence fell over the grand ballroom. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that precedes a storm. For a full 3 seconds, you could hear nothing but the hum of the air conditioning. And then, chaos erupted. It wasn't just gasps or murmurs. It was a roar. The collective shock of 300 of Chicago's most powerful people realizing they were in the same room as a monster. Camera flashes from the press section began to strobe like lightning, relentlessly targeting the Price Group's table. I saw Conrad Price slump in his chair, his face the color of ash, looking like a man who had just had his soul ripped out. But Victor was different. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He shot to his feet, knocking his chair over with a crash. His eyes, burning with a hatred so intense it was almost primal, locked onto mine across the room. "You bitch!" he screamed, his voice raw and tearing through the noise. "You will pay for this!" He lunged forward, but before he could take 2 steps, 2 of my plainclothes security guards, former Secret Service agents I had hired for the evening, intercepted him. They flanked him, their presence, an immovable wall of muscle and quiet professionalism. This was the signal. As Victor struggled, uniformed Chicago police officers, whom Leo had briefed and stationed discreetly in the hotel lobby, began to move in. The gala attendees parted like the Red Sea as the officers made a direct path to the head table. The night's entertainment had just taken a very real, very serious turn. Amidst the pandemonium, I saw Victor yank his arm free from a security guard just long enough to pull out his phone. His fingers moved frantically across the screen as he sent a single, quick text message. It was a desperate, final move, a Hail Mary pass in a game he had already lost. Then, the police were on him, and the phone was knocked from his hand, skittering across the polished floor. I made a mental note of it, a small, unsettling detail in the larger explosion of the evening. My own phone buzzed in my hand. It was my assistant, Isabel Reyes. Isabel was more than just an employee. She was my right hand, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman in her mid-20s who had been instrumental in the final stages of my plan. She had been the one to discreetly track down the former Thorne and Price employees, gathering affidavits about my grandfather's work on the Thorne-Crete patent. She had become a loose end, a witness to the truth. She was at the gala, but had stayed near the back, coordinating with the security and tech teams. Her text read, "It's done. Everything went perfectly. Leaving now through the service exit to avoid the circus. See you tomorrow, boss." I smiled, a small sense of relief amidst the adrenaline. The police led a shouting, struggling Victor and a catatonic Conrad Price out of the ballroom. The story was over. Justice was being served. I stepped down from the stage, the crowd parting for me now, their eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. As I was making my way towards Leo, my phone rang. The screen showed Isabel's name. "You were brilliant, Isabel," I said, picking up, my voice still buzzing with energy. But the voice on the other end wasn't Isabel's. It was a man, frantic and out of breath. "Ma'am, are you the owner of this phone's contact, Alara Thorne?" A cold spike of dread shot through me. "Yes, who is this?" This is a paramedic. There's been an accident. In the alley behind the Palmer house. A hit and run. The woman, she's in bad shape." The world dissolved into a tunnel. The noise of the ballroom faded to a distant roar. I heard Leo calling my name, but I was already running, pushing through the stunned crowd, my evening gown feeling like a lead weight. I ran out into the cold Chicago night, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. The text message, Victor's frantic text. It wasn't a cry for help, it was an order. How quickly a moment of victory can turn into a nightmare. It's a chilling reminder that when you push someone to the absolute edge, you can never truly predict how they'll lash out. Have you ever seen a situation escalate from a conflict into something truly dangerous? The shift is terrifying. When I arrived at the alley, the flashing red and blue lights painted the brick walls in horrifying strokes. I saw her. Isabel, lying on the wet pavement, surrounded by paramedics. Her beautiful dress was torn and dirty, and there was a darkness spreading on the asphalt beneath her that made my stomach heave. I saw her purse, its contents spilled nearby, the phone the paramedic had used lying shattered. It wasn't an accident, it was an assassination attempt. This was no longer a game of money and reputation. This was a war, and Victor had just drawn first blood, on my people. And in that moment, I knew my fight wasn't over. It had just entered a much darker, deadlier phase. The hours that followed were a blur of fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell of disinfectant, and the sterile beige walls of Northwestern Memorial Hospital's emergency waiting room. The adrenaline from the gala had curdled into a thick, cold dread that settled deep in my stomach. I had traded my evening gown for a pair of hospital scrubs a kind nurse had given me, but I could still feel the phantom weight of the sequins and silk. One moment, I was the queen on the chessboard, executing a flawless checkmate. The next, I was here staring at a clock on the wall where every tick felt like a hammer blow, a helpless bystander in a tragedy I had set in motion. Leo was a rock. He handled the police, his voice a low, steady murmur of legal terminology. He fielded calls from the press, who had somehow already descended on the hospital like vultures. He brought me coffee that I couldn't drink, but he couldn't shield me from the guilt. This was my fault. I had started a war, naive enough to believe it would be fought only in boardrooms and on balance sheets. But Victor, in his final desperate act, had reminded me that when you corner a predator, it doesn't just surrender. It tries to take everyone down with it. Isabel was the casualty of my hubris. After what felt like an eternity, a surgeon in blue scrubs, his face etched with exhaustion, came out to speak to us. "She's a fighter," he said, his voice gentle. "The surgery was successful in relieving the pressure on her brain. She's alive, but the trauma was severe. She's in a medically induced coma. For now, all we can do is wait." And so we waited. For 2 days, I didn't leave the hospital. I sat by Isabel's bedside in the ICU, a silent, sterile room filled with the rhythmic beeping and hissing of machines that were keeping her alive. I watched her still, pale face, her head wrapped in white bandages, and I made a silent vow. I would not rest until Victor paid for this. Not with money, not with reputation, but with his freedom. On the third morning, as the sun cast a pale gray light over Lake Michigan, I was holding her hand, talking to her softly, telling her about the company, about the news, about anything to fill the silence. And then I felt it, a faint squeeze. My head snapped up. Her eyelids were fluttering. "Isabel?" I whispered, my heart leaping into my throat. "Isabel, can you hear me?" Her eyes slowly opened, unfocused at first, then locking onto mine. Her lips moved, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. A nurse rushed in to help, giving her a small swab of water. "Mrs. Thorne," she finally whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "I'm here, Isabel. Don't try to talk, just rest." "No," she insisted, a flicker of the fierce determination I knew so well returning to her eyes. "You need to know." I leaned closer, my ear just inches from her lips. "Know what? What is it?" "My name," she breathed. "It's Isabel Reyes. My father was named Gabriel Reyes." The name meant nothing to me. "He was your grandfather's chief engineer," she continued, each word an immense effort. "At Thorne and Price. He was the one who helped him perfect the Thorncrete formula. He was his most trusted man." The room seemed to shrink around me. I could only hear her voice, piecing together a history I never knew existed. She told me that after Conrad Price stole the patent, her father was the only one who fought for my grandfather. He tried to go to the press, to the unions. In response, Conrad destroyed him. He was blacklisted from every firm in the Midwest. Unable to find work, branded a traitor, the shame and stress led to a heart attack that took his life when Isabel was just a little girl. "I didn't just apply for a job with you by chance," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "I sought you out. I knew our family's stories were connected. At first, it was for my own revenge. But then I saw who you were. I saw you had the same fire your grandfather did. I knew you were the only one who could bring justice for both of us. It's incredible how people come into your life for reasons you could never predict. You think you know someone, and then you find out your stories have been intertwined for generations. Has a friendship in your life ever turned out to have a much deeper, more surprising meaning? I would be so moved to hear about it in the comments." The revelation left me breathless. This brilliant, loyal young woman wasn't just my assistant. She was an ally, bound to me by a shared generational tragedy. "Isabel," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry." She shook her head slightly. "Don't be. Help me finish it." Her eyes grew intense. "My father knew your grandfather was preparing for this day. He kept a final piece of evidence. His original, handwritten journal, with all the formulas, signed partnership agreements, everything. It's the ultimate proof. He hid it. And my father's records, they show me where. With that, her eyes fluttered closed, her body succumbing to exhaustion, but she had given me the final piece of the puzzle. The ultimate weapon wasn't on a USB drive. It was a dusty old book, a ghost from the past, waiting in the dark, and now I knew where to find it. Leaving Isabel in the capable hands of the hospital staff, Leo and I left immediately. The address she had given us wasn't a bank or a law office. It was a place in the Pilsen neighborhood, a gritty, industrial heartland of Chicago that felt a world away from the gleaming skyscrapers downtown. We pulled up in front of a derelict brick warehouse, its windows boarded up, a faded sign ghosting across the facade. Thorn Construction, Est, 1978. This was it. The first building my grandfather ever bought. The birthplace of his dream. The air inside was thick with the smell of cold dust, damp concrete, and forgotten time. Beams of late-afternoon sun cut through the grime on a high window, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny ghosts. It was a cathedral of silence, a monument to what had been lost. Isabel's father's instructions were cryptic. Where the first thorn brick was laid, we searched the walls, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. Near the main loading bay, almost hidden behind a rusted electrical panel, we found it. A cornerstone, rough-hewn and simple, with the words Thorn and Price and the year chiseled into its face. It was a relic from a time when those two names meant partnership, not war. It took Leo and me, using a crowbar from his car's emergency kit, a full 10 minutes of grunting, straining effort to pry the brick loose. Behind it, nestled in the hollowed-out space, was a small, welded steel box. It was heavy and cold to the touch. With one final, wrenching groan of metal, we broke the lid open. Inside, wrapped in a protective layer of oilcloth, was a thick, leather-bound ledger, my grandfather's journal. I sat down on an overturned crate, the dust puffing up around me, and opened it. The first half was exactly what Isabel had promised. Page after page of my grandfather's neat, disciplined handwriting detailed the birth of Thorncrete. There were complex chemical equations, notes on tensile strength, and detailed diagrams. More importantly, there were meeting minutes and partnership agreements, all co-signed by a young, ambitious Conrad Price. It was the smoking gun, the irrefutable physical proof that could dismantle the Price Group in any court in the country. As I read further, the tone of the journal shifted. The scientific entries gave way to something more personal, more wounded. He wrote about the betrayal, not with the fire of rage I felt, but with a deep, cavernous sorrow. Conrad was more than a partner. He was my brother, one entry read. To see that brotherhood traded for greed, it's a wound that steel and concrete can't mend. I could feel the weight of his heartbreak across the decades, a pain so profound it made my own quest for revenge feel like a child's tantrum. Then I turned to the final page. The handwriting was different, shakier. It was dated just 3 months before he passed away. It was clear he knew his time was short, and that this entry was not for him, but for me. My dearest Alara, it began, if you are reading this, it means the world has turned in a way I both feared and expected. You have found the truth. This book holds the proof of Conrad's theft, a weapon I forged but chose not to wield. For years, I debated destroying him as he destroyed me, but I have learned a hard lesson in my time. Revenge is a poison you drink, hoping the other man will die. It is a chain, and I will not shackle my legacy, my true legacy, which is you to another man's sins. The words blurred through my tears. This book is your shield. Use it to protect yourself. Use it to rebuild what is ours and to secure justice for the good people, like Gabriel Reyes, who were harmed along the way. But do not use it for pure destruction. The greatest victory is not to burn your enemy's house to the ground. It is to build your own so magnificent that his becomes an irrelevant shadow. Live a life of peace and purpose, my Ellie. Free yourself from this. That is the only victory I ever wanted. That final message from my grandfather hit me so hard. It's this incredible idea that true freedom comes not from winning a fight, but from choosing to walk away from it. What do you all think? Is forgiveness a form of strength, or does true justice always require retribution? This is a deep one, and I'd love to read your thoughts. I closed the journal, holding it to my chest. The white-hot fire of my rage had been extinguished, replaced by a deep, resonant warmth. I finally understood my grandfather, not as a victim, but as a man of incredible strength who had chosen peace over war. I now held the power to utterly ruin the Price family, to salt the earth of their entire existence. But my grandfather's words had given me something more valuable than a weapon. He had given me a choice. I looked at Leo, my eyes clear for the first time in months. The war wasn't over, but now I knew how I was going to win it. And it wasn't going to be the way Victor or anyone else ever expected. Armed with my grandfather's journal and his final wish for peace, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The path forward was no longer clouded by the red mist of rage. Leo and I returned to the hospital, our purpose renewed. We would use the journal not as a cudgel to destroy, but as a scalpel to surgically remove the cancer that was the Price Group and ensure justice for Isabel and her family. But I had forgotten one crucial thing. I was dealing with a man who had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous animal on earth. The news came via a frantic call from the district attorney's office. During a prisoner transfer from the county jail to a downtown holding cell, Victor had collapsed, faking a violent grand mal seizure. In the ensuing chaos, as the panicked guards called for medics, a single bribed officer looked the other way for a crucial 10 seconds. It was all Victor needed. He slipped his cuffs, incapacitated the other guard, and vanished into the labyrinth of downtown Chicago. He was out. And I knew with a terrifying certainty that he wasn't running for the border. He was coming for me. Leo immediately put the hospital on lockdown and had my security team create a perimeter. He won't get near you. Or Isabel, Leo promised, his face grim. For hours, we waited in that tense, fortified bubble. But as the night wore on and no threat materialized, a false sense of security began to set in. Around 11 p.m., Leo had to leave to meet with the DA and deliver the authenticated copies of the journal. "I'll be back in an hour. Don't leave this floor," he said, kissing my forehead. I stayed in Isabel's room, watching the steady rhythm of her heart on the monitor. An hour passed, then 2. I felt a pang of guilt for keeping my security team cooped up all night. I decided to make a quick run to the hospital cafeteria to get them some coffee, telling the guard outside Isabel's door I'd be back in 10 minutes. It was a foolish, fatal mistake. The main corridors were still bustling, but as I turned down a side hallway leading to the parking garage elevator, the silence became absolute. The air grew cold. Suddenly, a hand clamped over my mouth from behind, rough and smelling of stale whiskey. An arm like a steel band wrapped around my waist, lifting me off my feet and dragging me into a dark stairwell. It was Victor. He was gaunt, his eyes wild and bloodshot. A terrifying caricature of the handsome man I had married. "You thought you could win, didn't you?" he hissed in my ear, his breath hot and foul. He dragged me down the concrete stairs and shoved me through a heavy door into the echoing emptiness of the underground parking garage. It was a concrete tomb, deserted and silent except for the hum of the ventilation. He threw me against a cold concrete pillar. "You and that little bitch in the hospital. You took everything from me." He pulled a knife from his jacket, its blade glinting under the dim fluorescent lights. "My father-in-law killed your father. It's only fair that I finish the job." My mind was racing, scanning for any escape. A fire extinguisher on the far wall, a red panic button near the elevator, my keys in my pocket with a heavy metal fob. I had to keep him talking. "It's over, Victor. Give yourself up." "It's over when I say it's over," he screamed, lunging. At that exact moment, a shout echoed through the garage. "Victor!" It was Leo. He must have had a bad feeling. He must have turned back. Victor, momentarily distracted, turned toward the sound, a snarl twisting his lips. Just in time to watch the show. That split second was all I needed. I drove my knee up into his groin with all my strength. He howled in pain, doubling over, and I scrambled away. He recovered with a furious roar and charged, not at me, but at Leo. The two men crashed into the side of a parked sedan. Leo was a lawyer, not a brawler, but he fought with the fierce desperation of a man protecting someone he loved. As they struggled, I saw the knife arc through the air. I didn't think, I acted. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall, pulled the pin, and blasted Victor square in the face with a thick cloud of white foam. Blinded and choking, he staggered back, dropping the knife. Leo seized the opportunity, tackling him to the ground and pinning his arms. Just as Victor began to struggle again, I brought the heavy steel canister down hard on the back of a nearby SUV's window. The glass exploded with a deafening crash, and the car's alarm began to shriek through the garage, its siren a beautiful, piercing wail of salvation. You never really know what you're capable of until you're in a situation like that, when it all comes down to pure survival instinct. It's a terrifying part of being human. Has a moment of crisis ever shown you a strength you never knew you had? Share your story. I think we can all learn from it. Headlights flooded the garage entrance as police cars screeched to a halt. Officers swarmed in, guns drawn. They pulled a screaming, foam-covered Victor off the ground and slammed him against the hood of a car. It was over. The physical threat, the final desperate lunge of a dying monster, had been met, and we had survived. The aftermath of the attack in the parking garage was a whirlwind of police statements, flashing cameras, and the quiet, steady presence of Leo, who navigated the legal storm with a calm I could only marvel at. The physical bruises on my arms and the lingering ache in my ribs faded within a week. The psychological bruises, however, would take longer to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. The monster was back in his cage, and this time, there would be no escape. What Victor failed to understand is that my grandfather's journal didn't just give me moral clarity, it gave the district attorney's office an ironclad, indisputable roadmap to his entire criminal enterprise. The dominoes began to fall, not with a whisper, but with a series of thunderous crashes that echoed through the city's legal and financial foundations. The charges against Victor were staggering. Leo sat with me in my sunlit living room, the penthouse, not the old house, and laid them out one by one. Attempted murder, for the hit and run on Isabel. Kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon, for the attack on me in the garage. Escaping custody, assaulting an officer. And that was just the violent, desperate finale. The white-collar charges were even more extensive. With the Aries sting video, Stella's USB drive, and my grandfather's journal as evidence, the DA built a case that was airtight. Dozens of counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and, thanks to the newly unearthed patent evidence, corporate espionage. I attended his arraignment. It was the only time I saw him in person after that night. He wasn't the impeccably dressed executive I had married or the raging monster from the garage. He was just a man. A diminished, hollowed-out man in a baggy orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He stood before the judge, a public defender by his side because his assets had been frozen. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. The judge read the charges, his voice droning on, each word another nail in the coffin of Victor's life. There was no bail. While Victor's personal world collapsed, the corporate one followed. Armed with the journal, Thorne Construction filed a civil lawsuit against the Price Group for 35 years of patent infringement. Our forensic accountants calculated the damages based on every single project they had ever built using the Thorne-Crete formula. The number was astronomical, well into the hundreds of millions. It was a figure designed not to be paid, but to be a death blow. Conrad Price, already facing his own conspiracy and fraud charges, saw his empire evaporate. The lawsuit was the final, fatal shot. Crippled by the loss of the Riverwalk contract and now facing a legal claim that dwarfed the company's entire valuation, the Price Group officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. I read the headline on my tablet, a quiet sense of finality washing over me. The House of Cards, built on a lie 35 years ago, had finally come down. But the most poetic justice was yet to come. In the bankruptcy proceedings, the court needed to auction off the company's assets to pay its creditors. As the holder of the largest legal claim against them, Thorne Construction was the primary creditor. We didn't just have a seat at the table, we owned the table. We acquired the entire asset portfolio of the Price Group, their equipment, their client lists, their downtown headquarters for pennies on the dollar. I had not only exposed the thief, I had legally and ethically repossessed the house he had built with my family's stolen bricks. There's something incredibly powerful about watching justice unfold, seeing every bad decision finally lead to its inevitable consequence. It's a slow process, but it's thorough. What do you believe is the most important element of true justice? Is it punishment, restitution, or something else entirely? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I stood in the now empty boardroom of the former Price Group headquarters, my new headquarters. My reflection stared back at me from the vast glass window overlooking the city. The war was over. The scales, after so many long years, had finally been balanced. The silence was not one of emptiness, but of potential. The question was no longer what I had to destroy, but what I was now free to build. A year can feel like a lifetime. Or, in my case, it can be the time it takes to build a new one. The person who stood in the empty boardroom of a conquered company is not the person I am today. The rage has cooled, leaving not a scar, but a quiet, tempered strength. The war is over, and in its place, a slow, beautiful peace has begun to grow. Thorn Construction has blossomed into everything I dreamed it could be. With my grandfather's name and patent legally restored, we became the city's leading innovator in sustainable building. Thorncrete, once a stolen secret, is now the foundation for a new generation of greener, stronger buildings across the Midwest. We didn't just take back an empire, we transformed it. The company is profitable, yes, but more than that, it's a source of pride, a testament to the idea that you can do good business without sacrificing your soul. It's the legacy my grandfather truly intended. The greatest victory, however, has been watching Isabel's recovery. Her journey was grueling. Months of intensive physical and occupational therapy, of learning to walk again, of fighting through the pain and the trauma. But her spirit, the same spirit that led her to fight for her family's honor, is unbreakable. She not only recovered, she thrived. Today, she walks with a slight limp, she jokingly calls her battle scar. And she is the heart and soul of our philanthropic efforts as the vice president of the Thorn Foundation. She now uses her family's story to help others who have been wronged by the powerful, turning her pain into a shield for the vulnerable. As for the architects of that pain, justice was methodical and absolute. Conrad Price passed away from a massive heart attack in his jail cell while awaiting trial, a broken man destroyed by his own greed. I received a single anonymous postcard from Lisbon 6 months ago. It was a picture of the ocean. On the back, 2 words, "Thank you." I knew it was from Stella. I hope she found whatever she was looking for. And Victor, he was found guilty on all counts. The judge, citing his utter lack of remorse and the calculated cruelty of his actions, sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole in 25 years. He will be an old man before he ever tastes freedom again. I don't think of him often. He is no longer a monster in my head, or a ghost from my past. He is just irrelevant. And that is a freedom I never thought I would feel. But the most profound change has happened in the quiet moments. My relationship with Leo, forged in the crucible of crisis, has settled into something deep and wonderful. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow build, founded on the bedrock of trust, respect, and a shared understanding of what it means to fight for what's right. My penthouse is no longer a fortress or a strategic lookout post. It's a home. A place filled with the smell of him making coffee in the morning and the sound of his easy laughter. It's the quiet, simple, beautiful peace my grandfather wished for me. We visited his grave this morning. It's on a beautiful, green hill overlooking the lake. The autumn air was crisp, and the sun was warm on our faces. I placed a bouquet of his favorite white lilies on the stone. I didn't need to speak out loud. I looked at his name, Augustus Thorn, carved into the granite, and I sent him a silent message. I understand now, Grandpa. The victory wasn't in the courtroom. It wasn't in the headlines or the bankruptcy filings. The victory was in this moment, this peace, this love. I rebuilt the company, but more importantly, I rebuilt myself. I'm free. My grandfather was right. The best revenge wasn't the victory, it was the peace that came after. It was building a new life so full and bright that the shadows of the past simply couldn't exist. And that's the thought I want to leave you with. In your own life, in your own battles, big or small, where can you choose to build instead of break? Where can you find your own freedom? Thank you so much for taking this incredible journey with me. Leo took my hand, his warmth seeping into mine. We stood there for a long time, not in mourning, but in gratitude. The cycle of hatred was broken, the legacy was secure, and a new, brighter one was just beginning. And so, we come to the end of this chapter. It was a long and difficult road, and I want to thank you for walking it with me. When I look back on the woman I was, the one crying in that silent living room, She feels like a stranger to me now. But she is also a part of me, a reminder of how much can change and how much strength we can find within ourselves when we are pushed to the absolute limit. My story had millions of dollars and corporate takeovers, but at its heart, it was never about the money. It was about reclaiming a voice that had been silenced and a name that had been tarnished. It was about realizing that the foundation my grandfather left me wasn't just financial. It was a foundation of integrity, resilience, and the quiet courage to choose peace. We all face betrayals in our lives, big and small. We all have moments where it feels like our world has been shattered. But the pieces can be put back together. Not in the same way they were before, but into something new, something stronger. If this story resonated with you, if it moved you or made you think, letting me know by liking the video truly means the world to me. It tells me that these messages of strength and survival matter. I share stories like this every week, stories about the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the battles we fight both in the world and within ourselves. If that's a conversation you want to be a part of, I would be honored if you would subscribe and join our community here. And of course, if you know someone who is fighting their own battle and might need to hear that it's possible to build a beautiful life on the other side of pain, feel free to share this story with them. Until next time, be kind to yourselves, look after one another, and never forget the incredible power you have to write your own ending. Take care.